This week on Low Budget Binge, we have a very late sequel, a couple of school trips gone wrong, and some hillbilly horrors. Plus, I begin delving into a new indie horror movie series, Robert the Doll. Let's start binging. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go. Robert, aka Robert the Doll, is available streaming on Tubi. It's directed and written by Andrew Jones. Based on real-life events, according to the opening scrawl, Robert is the name of a cursed doll that has been passed down through generations, bringing all kinds of weirdness and bad events with him. When a housekeeper is fired from the Otto residence, she gives their son Gene, played by Flynn Allen, the doll. Gene immediately forms a close bond with the doll, but it creeps the hell out of his mother, Jenny, played by Susie Frances Garton. Soon, cruel acts of mischief occur around the house, and though Jenny believes Gene is the culprit, Gene insists that Robert is the one doing it all. Most likely due to the popularity of the Annabelle movies, folks scrambled to find real-life haunted doll stories, and the tale of Robert is probably one of the most famous ones because it is said to have been the inspiration for the Child's Play series. But for the most part, Robert isn't an animatronic ginger grump with a penchant for voodoo and Jennifer Tilly. This Robert is much more like Annabelle in that it inspires evil to occur around them. It doesn't move, though I guess a few POV shots indicates that it might. There are a few snippets of Robert in motion, but for the most part, it's just the doll popping up in different locations. Filmmaker Andrew Jones is vague with what Robert can and can't do, as well as why he's a cursed doll in the first place. But I guess those questions are for the sequels to address. Robert's face is kind of creepy. It's been said before that it looks a lot like Willem Dafoe, and I can see the resemblance. Still, I feel that his face is either shown too much or shown in a light or from an angle that really doesn't look that creepy. I think it's a case of showing the doll too much that spoiled it for me. Robert is not unwatchable. It feels like there are some decent production values put into it, and while the acting from Susie Frances Garton and Lee Bain as the parents aren't the warmest, it's much better than the usual low-budget fare. There is sort of a dank gray tone to the entire movie, which makes the watching experience feel distant as well. The real Robert story took place in Florida, but for some reason, this film takes place in England, it seems, though there are a few American actors in it, which makes the setting feel off-kilter and hard to place. While the ending is very familiar to the fourth installment of a very popular slasher franchise, it worked for me. Robert has a few moments of decent tension, and I did like the toothy ending it wrapped up with. Having experienced some of real DIY stinkers, I was expecting much worse from this first installment of the Robert series. I'll be covering The Curse of Robert the Doll next week, so we'll see if the film will maintain the momentum it had with its decent beginning. It's not a wholehearted recommendation, but there are tons of worse dolly horror films out there than this one. Stoker Hills is new on demand and digital download. It's also on Amazon Prime from Screen Media and 101 Films. It's directed by Benjamin Lewis and written by Joshua Kuehner. A pair of film students, David Gridley and Vince Hill Bedford, and an aspiring actress, Stephanie Brass, are collaborating on a film school assignment to make a short horror film. While filming, the actress is kidnapped, and the pair of filmmakers trail the killer to his lair, filming the pursuit the entire way. Meanwhile, much later in the timeline, a pair of detectives recover the camera the filmmakers were using and attempt to piece together the trail in order to track down the killer and hopefully some of the abductees before they're killed. While the premise has a somewhat intriguing Saw-like plotline, which attempts dual plotlines bound for a collision, I had a very difficult time getting into Stoker Hills. It feels like the filmmakers definitely wanted to highlight the detective angle, which is a somewhat refreshing slant to this type of slasher film. Still, when you don't really give a shit about the victims, it's hard to give a shit about the movie. And that's the problem from pretty much the beginning. Gridley and Bedford come off as privileged dude bros goofing off in their film class, taught by horror icon Tony Todd, in an appearance that barely counts as a cameo. After they disrupt the class, we cut to a first-person POV from their camera where their antics are filmed while they attempt to make their movie. The thing is, we never really see the movie they're trying to put together. All we see is them unappealingly chatting behind the scenes and then follow them as they frantically try to track down their abducted friend. The whole getting to know you part of the film is wasted, as the more I got to know these two jerks, the less I liked them. And while the rest of the film moves at a decent clip, because Stoker Hills failed to grab my investment in the first 20 minutes, I really didn't give a fig no matter the pace. There's some kind of sci-fi stuff going on with the killer, where he's genetically altered in some way, leading to some connection between the victims and the killer's real intent. It all reminded me of stuff James Wan was writing over a decade ago. I guess if you're a fan of the Saw series, this might be a film you'll want to check out. Still, if I'm being completely honest, I zoned out on this one way too early and never found the reason to care about it after that. The Boonies is new on-demand, digital download, and on DVD from Indican Pictures. It's directed by Lance Parkin and written by Lance Parkin and Matt Schultz. A group of guys go on a hiking trip for a bachelor party and accidentally enter the territory of a weird cannibal family. Not the normal kind of cannibal family, the weird kind. The Boonies is just your typical hiking/cannibal family horror film. There are a whole bunch of victims trouncing around in the woods and being out of their element. There are a group of cannibal hunters using various forms of weaponry and knowledge of the forest to track down and kill them. If you've seen The Burning or Wrong Turn or anything in between those two films, you've seen this one before. Still, it follows the well-blazed trail of many, many horror films before it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It does the cannibal family thing decently, though. The acting is not as bad as other films made on this budget. Even though the lines aren't the smoothest and most natural, the actors do their best at being likable and relatable before they end up on the business end of the hunter's knives. The blood isn't extraneous, keeping within the low-budget parameters. The gore is simplistic but works at conveying its primitive tone. Filmmaker Lance Parkin takes advantage of the heavily forested environment and builds some suspenseful scenes where the killers stalk their prey. There's a fun scene where a captured woman is forced to listen to her boyfriend being slurped and devoured by the killers in the other room that uses disgusting sounds effectively well, focusing only on the woman's face. There's also a twist to the final girl trope, as wedding bells are sounded for one unlucky camper. This one apes the Texas Chainsaw Massacre a bit too much, and even culminates with a very tired scene at a dinner table. There's not a lot new to see here, but I didn't mind my time with the Boonies, and as long as you aren't expecting anything game-changing, it's a film that clocks in, does its job, and leaves at quitting time without straying from the norm or sticking its neck out to be too different. Teardrop is new, streaming exclusively on Tubi. It's directed by Stephen R. Monroe and written by Spyder Dobrofsky. A high school writing group, chaperoned by two teachers, take a school trip to a ghost town for some reason and end up stirring up some real ghosts and a horrible town secret. I'm glad Tubi is beginning to make their own content, though the quality of that content is pretty bad if you ask me. I'm in no rush to see Titanic 666, but one of these days maybe they'll be putting out something cool. Teardrop isn't that, but it's not terrible either. Teardrop is as middle of the road as you're going to get. I don't know what kind of school you went to, but in some strange universe, schools have the budget and teachers think it's a good idea to take minors on a trip to dangerous locations. I don't know how many movies center on this concept. I get it, you need to get a group of people into a strange environment, but Teardrop barely does the work to make this one a believable scenario. None of the three kids seem like they really want to be writers. One is studious, the other is a wannabe rapper, and the third is simply there as eye candy because of her huge rack. This is labeled as a writing trip by these two teachers, but they're too interested in each other to watch the kids. None of the kids seem age appropriate, which is the norm in Hollywood movies, and there's not a lot of learning experiences going on. leaving the kids to wander off, get high, get drunk, flirt with one another, and then get tormented by ghosts. I just wish they would have thought through the initial premise of the school trip and made it a logical part of the story, rather than simply getting people who hardly know each other together to get terrified by a monster of the week scenario. Teardrop is not the only film guilty of this crime, but it's a symptom of a script and concept simply not well thought out and prevalent in too many movies to count. The acting is serviceable by the two leads. Jeff Branson's hair is a little too perfect, but he plays the part as he becomes more and more obsessed with the lore of the ghost town called Teardrop. Murray Gray is much stronger as Rebecca. She's the perfect candidate for the final girl. I also like the old innkeeper Denver, played by American Horror Story and Parks and Recreation's Bradley Fisher, who delivers some hokey lines but gives them the gravitas to work. I don't want to write off Teardrop completely. It has a TV horror sort of vibe where nothing is too intense and scary, but there are some creepy scenes throughout. The film incorporates some weird scarecrows, looking like human-sized Raggedy Ann and Andes. It also smartly uses small bits of CG to its maximum potential in a demon dog sequence in the barn, which highlights only the dog's eyeshine in the darkness. This shows a bit of tact and intelligence behind the film. Knowing its limitations in budget, it's still maximizing what they have. After meandering through the plot for about an hour, Teardrop picks up some steam towards the end and grows some teeth as the students begin to be picked off. I wish the fun and intensity of the last half hour would have been more evenly dispersed. Don't expect much from this one, but I'm glad Tubi is doing what it's doing. They just nabbed the rights to make a Terror Train remake, so maybe that will be a worthwhile one to check out. New on DVD and Blu-ray from VCI Entertainment is Dark Night of the Scarecrow 2, aka STRAWEYES. It's directed and written by J.D. Feigelson. 40 years after the events of Dark Night of the Scarecrow, a single mom and her son shows up in a small country town which coincides with a series of deaths. Seems the boy has formed some kind of connection with the long-dead Bubba, which means a bale of vengeance is coming to anyone who threatens his family. Dark Night of the Scarecrow is arguably one of the best TV horror movies of all time. It was a moody campfire tale about an innocent man who hides in a scarecrow from an angry mob and is gunned down only to return to enact vengeance upon them. It was cause and effect with a creepy scarecrow. It was filled with ambiance and dark mood, not heavy on blood, but man was it effective and scary. I understand someone might want to come along and remake it. That seems to be the flavor of the day in horror. But a sequel set 40 years later seems absolutely unnecessary and kind of crazy. Sure, I appreciate that the writer of the original is back to write and direct. I do appreciate the effort to make the story connect with the original, but the connections are pretty threadbare. One of the characters is vaguely related to Bubba, and this is supposed to take place in the town the original was set, but other than that, this really could be just the 1,000,001th Scarecrow flick that is ripping off the original Dark Night of the Scarecrow. The biggest issue with the sequel is that it feels more like a fan film than an actual production. The lighting is really bad. Most everything is shot during the daytime, which immediately takes away from the dark atmosphere from a film titled Dark Night of the Scarecrow. The acting is pretty amateur. The actors this film found aren't terrible, but lack the pizzazz of those with experience and training. And a lot of the writing seems like an afterthought, as if a Scarecrow movie was being made, and halfway through they found out they could use the rights to Dark Night of the Scarecrow for a sequel. Most likely, due to the new trademark and copyright laws, the rights to Dark Night fell back into the hands of the writer, so he decided to make a sequel now and do the whole thing himself. If anything, this strikes a bit of fear into my heart, as if this is any indication of what happens when rights are reverted. I'm terrified to see what Victor Miller would try to do with the Friday the 13th rights. But Dark Night of the Scarecrow 2 isn't completely bad. I like the look of the Scarecrow. It's similar to the original, but slightly more angular in the face. I could have done without the CG used to subtly move the fabric about the eyes and mouth, but the slight eye glow is pretty cool. I also think that this film does a surprisingly good job of building tension. There are numerous nicely paced scenes as the Scarecrow creeps up on its next victim. There really is a nice sense of suspense and true patience in filmmaking going on here, despite its flaws. There's a DIY charm to Dark Knight of the Scarecrow 2. It lacks the production and professionalism. It lacks that magic campfire tale quality that permeated the original. But it's a decent, low-budget time waster that feels somewhat rushed and serves as no-brainer entertainment. Ultimately, I think this is an uncalled-for sequel that could have been produced by more talented people given the reverence for the original.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're doomed. Oh, you're doomed. You're doomed. You're doomed. Live the life.